After 6 years, we finally got Tears of the Kingdom, the long-awaited sequel to Breath of the Wild. Once again, I have drawn upon Australian magics to play the game early so I could make a video for release day. Now I know everyone, including myself, is terrified of spoilers, so I'll start by saying that I will not spoil any story, and most of the footage shown will be the starting area. I haven't beaten the game, so this is more of a first impressions thing. For a too long didn't watch, I do like the game a lot. It does just seem like a better Breath of the Wild, and it's a ton of fun. But for a $70 price tag, I kinda wish it had a little more. So let's just dive into it. Tears of the Kingdom handles almost identical to Breath of the Wild. It's the same engine after all, but Nintendo, those tricky dickies, decided to patch out all the speedrun techniques I know. Even going so far as to punish you for attempting to whistle run by draining stamina at a higher rate. The game, for unknown reasons, removes the abilities from the previous title and gives a few new ones. I say unknown because from what I've played, Sheikah's stuff is just gone, and they don't really say why. Like, Zelda doesn't even have the slate, it's the Pura pad now. The new abilities are Ascend, Fuse, Magnesis but Sticky, and Ascend letting you go through ceilings and pop out on top, but only sometimes because it's kind of finicky if it's not completely flat. It'll also have weird loading screens for incredibly thin objects. Fuse lets you combine for a variety of effects. You can attach things to your weapon, shield, and arrows. Weapons are almost necessary because the base weapons are all trash now. Literally, they canonically all rust because plot. So you'll need to stick on boulders, baubles, and beanies to make them worth a ding-dang-doodle. Arrows get a lot of use from Fuse, since that's how you now make elemental arrows, but unfortunately, you have to select Fuse for every separate arrow. You can't just turn Fuse on and pull from your supplies akin to elemental arrows in Breath of the Wild, which is really annoying. The menu can get a little obnoxious to scroll through too, since there are so many materials, but at least you can sort by most used. You can get interesting effects too, like eyeballs turning your arrows into homing devices. Magnesis but Sticky is Magnesis, but you can stick stuff together with glue, which can be helpful in making bridges or even making complex vehicles with the aid of Zonai devices, which I'll talk about in a bit. Rewind time is hot, and as the name implies, can send objects back in time. So if an enemy throws something at you or something is moving the wrong way, you can reverse it. It is also great for cheesing almost all of the shrines, because you can turn basically anything into a moving platform. The effect is cool, but it honestly kind of feels like a less interesting version of stasis, especially because you can't use it on enemies, only stuff they throw. Another major aspect of the game are the Zonai devices. These are obtained through not gacha devices. Striking them will activate them, and they also can be fused to weapons and stuff for nifty effects. The dispensers aren't completely random and only have 4 different objects to each one. You can use specific materials to roll for them, and when you find one that gives you stuff you like, you can spend a lot more there. Like whenever I find the controller gacha machine, I'll spend all of my materials there. Things are pretty fun to build, but without a controller, they can really only go one way. So normally, you'll boost for a bit until your battery dies or you hit something, and then you have to lug it around while you recharge. However, some devices are really cool, like the glider, and the physics in the game are great, so you can actually steer by moving on top of certain things. It's weird though, because the game clearly wants you to build, but the time spent making the things and repositioning them seem like they take longer than just riding a horse there. Especially factoring in that things don't even last forever and disappear after a certain amount of time, or if you teleport or enter a shrine. I'm sure with more charge and more materials it's way better, but in a 9-hour span, I mostly only built for jokes. I won't deny though, it was incredibly fun to make stuff, so I definitely wouldn't label it as a bad feature, I just kind of wish it had some tweaks. Apparently there's an auto build mode that you can get that I've seen in some previews, but I don't know where it is or how it works, so bleh. The world is massive, and it's funny because the previews have been a little misleading. They've really only showcased the sky, but there is actually an entire underground map as well, but I guess this doesn't make for as good of trailer footage. The sky is incredibly scarce, mostly only housing some gachas and launch points. The starting plateau of the game is the largest mass the sky has to offer that I've seen so far. There are some really cool puzzles to solve and treasure to find though, and honestly the floating islands is just kind of a great motif. It's cool to just look down and scout the land below. There's caves in the game too, which is great and definitely something Breath of the Wild lacked. Some are very tiny and others are pretty massive. I spent like 30 minutes roaming around in one. It definitely helps the map feel more complete. So it is the same map from Breath of the Wild, but there is a lot more stuff. Most of the original map kind of felt empty, but it feels like this one has way more points of interest. Enough too that the map doesn't really feel like a retreading. Sure, major locales will seem familiar, but that's not really bad because I didn't have the original map completely memorized either, so it still felt new running around. But one of the coolest parts is something that was really only shown in one small shot of the trailers, the underground. And I'm not talking about caves, this is an entire map of underground, with its own towers, basically, and nothing but new. I loved this addition so much, and it made my opinion of the game skyrocket. They have a risk mechanic because enemies that hurt you here remove your max HP, and you can only get it back with towers, dishes, or returning to the surface. You get a lot of goodies and upgrade materials here, so it's great to just wander around in it, but it poses a risk if you stay too long. The game also has dungeons, thank God, and they do feel a little more akin to classic dungeons, but the one I played was essentially still activate the terminals like the Divine Beast. But getting around to them felt a little more like exploring Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild. Plus, the boss wasn't just a Ganon, so that's a step up. From what I played, it does seem like a much better version of Breath of the Wild, which was already pretty great. Still though, with a 6-year development time and a $70 price tag on a game that's essentially last-gen hardware, I kinda wanted a bit more. Lack of enemy variety in the first was huge, and whereas this game does add more baddies, you'll still be fighting bokoblins and Lizalfos 90% of the time. I don't really count the constructs as new enemies because they're basically just Zonai bokoblins. Now, you can get it for 50 with the voucher deal, which is 1,000,000,000% worth it. And if you absolutely loved Breath of the Wild like so many did, it's worth the $70 for you too, I'm sure. I plan on doing a follow-up video akin to the Breath of the Wild salt I made a while back that goes more in depth once I've, experienced more of the game. I will say though, and I hope to God I'm wrong, but I did get one memory cutscene, and if all the cool parts happen in the past again, I will riot! And no, Nintendo, you're not allowed to make another Hyrule Warriors, call it canon, and then introduce an alternate timeline.